The most common objection I hear when I'm working with people one-on-one who might feel some restrictions or pains in their bodies is that they shouldn't train hard. And I don't blame them, since most of the time people have been here to either rest, to ice, or avoid any type of stimulus in order to protect themselves. And while it feels common sense to not aggravate pain, it's actually the most counterproductive strategy you can adopt in order to get out of pain and build a more resilient and athletic body. Because after years of dealing with restrictions and pains myself, I've come to realize that this fear-mongering label that the fitness industry has put on us might be actually one of the core reasons why you're still suffering from chronic restrictions or chronic pain. So in this video, I'm going to provide you with a framework that I use for myself, but also with the people that I work with to help them approach their pains as a path forward rather than a constant battle fighting uphill. So the problem when most people experience pain that is constantly reoccurring, it puts them into a false perspective of their body's actual ability. Since they feel pain, they subconsciously label their body now as fragile. And when that happens, the next line of thought is that they should avoid any type of serious stimulus at all costs. This creates a downward spiral of less activity overall, less training with intensity, and more trying out these random exercises, all in a pursuit to see if they can mitigate or reduce their pain. Yet they don't see any result. And when months or years go by without seeing any tangible progress, they enter a state of complete despair, whether it will ever be okay. Here's why you don't see the results you're searching for. Most physical issues point to one equation that is not currently in your favor. And that equation is that your state is the outcome of your physical capacity to meet a certain stimuli or stressor. A pinching sensation at the level of the shoulder, lower back issues, a pull-up you cannot do yet, it all points to the same thing. The shoulder might pinch because your rotator cuff muscles might not work efficiently. A lower back issue might point towards hip that might feel some restrictions. Not being able to do a pull-up hints towards not having enough vertical pulling strength. All of these issues point towards the same thing. Your physical capacity is lower than the stressor it needs to meet. And when this happens chronically, the body and especially the brain is very intelligent, where it sends you a very powerful signal to alert you. And that signal is pain. And because being in pain could endanger our survival from an evolutionary perspective, it's a very potent and strong signal that often overrules other signals that we also use to gather information. But like pain is the result of having too little capacity versus the stimuli it needs to deal with, having no pain or even power is the result of increasing that capacity to meet or even overcome that stimuli it needs to deal with. Just like building strength or increasing your muscle size. If you don't stimulate your max capacity, there's not a reason for the body to change. However, if you provide enough stimuli at your max capacity, you will see changes over time. So whether you want to become stronger, you want to run faster, you want to jump higher, or remove pain, they all follow a similar physiological process. And the good news is that this should offer you some hope in order to get out of pain, because it actually flips the script. It tells us that your experience of pain or certain restrictions is not a set in stone symptom. It's actually a signal that you can use to modify the body with proper stimulation. So the framework I like to use is: 1, simply finding out how much range you can cover of a joint that might feel restricted or painful. 2, stimulate that coverable range as much as you can. And 3, per session, try to see if you can increase the stimulation slightly and monitor how much pain still occurs when you're performing the specific exercise. And by doing this over a period of time, you're telling the brain and nervous system it's okay to downregulate pain towards a specific area. Plus, it increases the capacity of your tissues by growing stronger, so it can tolerate higher demands over time. So let's say you experience some pain in your knees. The knee is able to flex and extend, and also in a certain position able to rotate a little bit inwards and outwards. Let's use the spectrum of flexion and extension as an example, but this applies for every movement direction your joints can perform. Let's say that this line represents the range of motion from extension to flexion. Now, this is what happens most of the time when people experience a restriction or pain. Once they move and reach this point, the pain occurs. This has a radiating effect where the next time we move into that zone, we are potentially a bit more anxious and we want to decrease that range and over time avoid it completely. I see this more as the symptom approach. You feel pain, you decrease the load/range, and you lower the capacity. However, if you view it as a signal that can attract your attention, what you can actually do is increase the load on the range that feels not in pain or restricted. This then signals the brain it one needs to remodel tissue, and two, we own that range. And this is super important for you to know, since what ends up happening over time, the brain and body feel more and more confident for you to explore that range in a safe manner. And from my personal experience, but also seeing it with a lot of people that I've helped, if you draw your attention towards building enough strength at a full range of motion across the various movement directions of the shoulders and the hips, those tend to have the highest bang for your buck. Now, let me give you an example of this in practice. So for myself and people that I work with, I try not to overcomplicate things by throwing random exercise at their faces. However, having positions that your body can move into that can be scaled up towards very high levels, but also can be scaled down towards very easy progressions, so you can always meet somebody at their current physical capacity. Let's stick to the flexion and extension range, and one exercise that I like to use for it is the sissy squat. So with the sissy squat, as we're descending towards the ground, more flexion will appear at the level of the knee, where at one point you will feel the sensation of pains or restrictions coming to the surface. The symptom approach would have you notice it, stay away, and avoid this pattern entirely. The signal approach is to search the signal of pain and stimulate the amount of range we can cover maximally. Now, first we want to establish a safety net. In this case, we can lower towards the ground while having the hands and arms on a supporting surface. Then during the first repetition of this pattern, we constantly check. Can we still go back up? Can we still exit? Do we feel safe? If that's a yes, we keep going. We do so until we find our max range of motion in which we feel stuck or we feel some restrictions or pain emerging. After this first rep, you know how much range you can cover that is tolerable. Plus, you always know that you can fall back on the arms when you need to for support. Then during the next couple of repetitions, we load the patterns as much as we can by releasing the weight off the hands until we reach our max range of motion. Once we hit it or we feel stuck, then you're going to push up and you're going to add in support with the hands when needed. The rule of thumb here is very simple, is that you keep going until you feel a level of fatigue, you feel unmotivated, or you have no desire to continue. Most of the time I program it for 1 to 3 sets and then you're done for the week. Now, if you apply this framework, what you'll notice is that over time, the nervous system feels more confident to give you potentially more range you can cover with even more load, because you've increased your physical capacity to deal with the stressor or stimuli at that moment in time. Now, for example, with the sissy, if you can perform a sissy squat at full range of motion, the next step you can do is you can always add in more weight so that the stressor becomes more and your physical capacity is stimulated to grow and get stronger and stronger with every week. So we're not avoiding stimuli, but we're actually using a very effective and short amount of intensity so that the body has received the necessary signals to change. And then we use the rest of the week, the rest of the 6 days to heal, recover, and come back fully fresh the next time. So the key takeaway here is to not fear pain, but paradoxically be a bit more fascinated about it by training hard at maximum intensity over a coverable range of motion of a joint that might give you some restrictions or pains currently. So hopefully by applying this framework to your own unique situation, you can start to reduce or even eliminate any restrictions or pains, as it's done with me and also the people that I work with. Now, if you potentially want guided support to help you spot out which ranges of motions or which joints give you the most restrictions or pains right now, in combination with a plan of very high effective exercises that should cover your entire week in 90 minutes or less, you can apply in the link below. And without further ado, see you till next time.